Call of Duty Ghosts is one of the most hated Call of Duty games of all time, but is Call of Duty Ghosts really that bad? What's going on, guys? It is JSnake here, and today, guys, I'm bringing you another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about Call of Duty Ghosts, and if the game was really as bad as a lot of people made it out to be. Now, guys, before we actually get in this video, make sure you're subscribed to the channel with post notifications turned on, so you can be notified every single time I do upload a new video. Also, guys, before we actually get in this video, I just want to announce real quick that I have made a Discord server, and I've decided to make a Discord server because as I read your guys' comments, I'm really intrigued by them. I really like reading through them. I really like reading to see what you guys have to say, and a Discord server is literally the best way for us to communicate with each other. So I created a Discord server. The link's gonna be in the description, so make sure you do join that. We can talk about really anything, you know, Call of Duty related, not Call of Duty related, I mean whatever, theories, you know, stuff that is released, really anything. And I made it, and it's a pretty well-made Discord server in my opinion. I had a professional, I guess you could call it, make the server. We have stuff like upload notifications and basically a completely set up permission system. Everything's really cool, so make sure you guys do join. That link will be in the description. But with that being said, let's get into the video. So Call of Duty Ghosts received so much flack for various different reasons, and I'm not saying that this flack was completely undeserved, but I don't necessarily agree with all of it, and I don't necessarily think Call of Duty Ghosts should have got as much flack as it did. I notice a lot of people do say that I tend to at least hate on kind of Call of Duty Ghosts, and they say that I think it was such a bad game and everything, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But guys, like I said in the comments, I by no means hate Call of Duty Ghosts. I literally am just kind of speaking facts and saying stuff that is most likely the true case, because if you think about it, it would be a financial disaster, and I know I've said this so many times, but it would just be a financial disaster for Activision to release Call of Duty Ghosts 2. By no means am I saying that I would not want to Call of Duty Ghosts 2 or that I didn't like the first one, but if we're talking in terms of the whole community, if we're talking in terms of the most profitable game that could actually be released, Call of Duty Ghosts 2 is not the game for that. For all I know, Call of Duty Ghosts 2 could be the best Call of Duty game of all time if it did came out, but just because of the name and just because of how tainted the Ghosts name is, it just wouldn't do as good as it should or as any other Call of Duty game would do. And please, I can't emphasize this enough. I know I've said this so many times, but I keep getting comments about me just hating Call of Duty Ghosts. I do not hate it. In fact, I enjoyed Call of Duty Ghosts. I had some good times on there. I liked a lot of things they tried to do with Call of Duty Ghosts, and I did think Call of Duty Ghosts was ahead of its time in terms of the actual Call of Duty series. But anyways, what is with all the hate? Why did people hate Call of Duty Ghosts so much? Now, I think a lot of the hate boils down to just the time Call of Duty Ghosts released, and I've touched on this a tad in a few previous videos, but I would like to go more in depth with this and kind of explain it better. So if you guys don't know, Call of Duty Ghosts did release alongside Battlefield 4, obviously Battlefield being Call of Duty's biggest competitor. Well, maybe not this year, but still, it typically is Call of Duty's biggest competitor. And the two games were going completely head to head. I mean, there was developers shading each other, many popular videos coming out from like Clint Eastwood and stuff about how Call of Duty Ghosts versus Battlefield 4, the Battlefield 4 vs Call of Duty Ghosts rap. I mean, it is honestly, it was a crazy time. Literally, fans from both sides, like it was like the KSI versus Logan Paul boxing fight. I mean, it was insane. And the actual initial lead up to Call of Duty Ghosts, like from the time it was first announced to at least a couple months in, like around E3, people were pretty excited for the game, and there wasn't necessarily much hate. The hate really came after the game launched, or maybe a little bit before it launched. But before we even get into the launch, both of the games were obviously crazily hyped up, and they were obviously boasting about all the new features they were adding and all the stuff that was going to happen. But here's where it gets bad for Call of Duty Ghosts. One of the biggest things with Call of Duty Ghosts and what they tried to do is actually create dynamic environments. They really wanted the map to play out differently if some sort of event happened, or they didn't want it to feel the exact same each time. And this was something we never really saw in a Call of Duty game prior to this, and even now to a degree we still don't have the scale of the dynamic environments that we saw in Call of Duty Ghosts. But here's the thing about Call of Duty Ghosts dynamic environments. It all comes back down to its biggest competitor, Battlefield 4. While Ghosts was introducing dynamic environments and map changing events, they were nothing to the scale of what we saw with Battlefield 4. If you guys didn't know, Battlefield 4 introduced a new feature called Levolution, which basically created these gigantic map changing events, and they honestly completely changed the map. It was like you're playing a whole different map after they happened. The biggest example of this is obviously the skyscraper that does collapse if you do shoot out the pillars. I mean, an entire skyscraper comes down. So when you compare it to Call of Duty Ghost dynamic environments, there was a lot of jokes and everything being made about how stupid and how dumb the Call of Duty Ghost dynamic environments and map changing events were compared to the Battlefield 4 map changing events. Now here's the thing, in terms of actual scale, Battlefield dwarfs Call of Duty in that. And by no means is this a bad thing, but obviously Battlefield 4 and the Battlefield series in general is just on a much larger scale in terms of the actual battlefield than Call of Duty. And that's not a bad thing at all. Call of Duty is supposed to be this close quarters arcade FPS shooter, whereas Battlefield is supposed to be this shooter that takes place on a very large scale. And I mean, yes, the games are both FPS games, but I don't necessarily think they should be compared because they are both FPS games, yes, but I think that they just are too different in terms of their actual scale and what they're trying to kind of accomplish. Call of Duty's purpose is to create a very fun and fast-paced kind of arcade-esque shooter that doesn't take place on a large map and it's easy to get into firefights, whereas Battlefield is trying to do the opposite, at least not necessarily to the same scale of Call of Duty, and they're trying to create a massive environment with vehicles, map-changing events, just an overall gigantic experience. But to the masses, Call of Duty Ghosts just seemed like such an inferior game in comparison to Battlefield 4. And I don't necessarily agree with this criticism at all. I did enjoy Battlefield 4 a lot. I spent probably more hours on Battlefield 4 than I did with Call of Duty Ghosts, but I just don't think Call of Duty Ghosts should have got the amount of hate in terms of its actual map-changing events, dynamic environments, which is where a lot of it actually stemmed from. But that's the hate that kind of the overall gaming industry was giving Call of Duty Ghosts. But what about the fans of Call of Duty Ghosts and the Call of Duty series in general? Now, a lot of people complain that Call of Duty Ghosts was just such a slow-paced game with a very, very fast time to kill. They said the maps were too big for a Call of Duty game and the time to kill was so short that if you shoot someone with like 3 bullets, they're dead. And I do kind of see where these are coming from a little bit, but I just don't necessarily think it was that bad as people say it was. The maps, yes, they were larger than we'd normally kind of experience, but it wasn't really that bad. I mean, it was nothing that completely changed the game, that completely ruined the game. I still had a lot of fun in the multiplayer sessions I did play in. I just feel like people completely overreacted to this, and I thought this was just completely unnecessary. As for the dynamic environment and what people in the Call of Duty community thought about it, I'm pretty sure they generally enjoyed it. I thought they liked it. I mean, how can you not like that? It's just like little things that change the game, change how it's played. It's more of a kind of tactical and strategy that you need to kind of implement into your game, and it was really cool. I mean, we had the bus falling down, the elevator shaft, we had the stoplight falling on the car, the entire gas station collapsing. I mean, yes, it wasn't anything in comparison to Battlefield 4, but it's not supposed to be in comparison to Battlefield 4. I really did enjoy these dynamic environments, and we still haven't really seen these as much as we did in Call of Duty Ghosts in the more recent Call of Duty games, which is why earlier in the video I said Call of Duty Ghosts was ahead of its time, because I mean, it was really pretty ahead of its time. It was technically developed on the last generation consoles. Yes, it did have a bit of development with the next gen, but Call of Duty Ghosts was like the first iteration of Call of Duty to actually go onto next gen consoles. So it did have to kind of compensate for the last generation players. They couldn't go crazy full out with the graphics or the actual dynamic environment or whatever, because they still had to kind of compensate for these last generation players. Another thing that you have to keep in mind with Call of Duty Ghosts is that this was the first Call of Duty game after a large portion of the Infinity Ward developers had that whole fiasco, and Infinity Ward was very understaffed at the time, so they were kind of rushing and really working overtime to get this game righty. But regardless of these limitations, it was still a pretty solid game. Now, I wasn't necessarily the biggest fan of Extinction, and I wish they did prefer Spec Ops. It was a cool change, and people were comparing it too much to Zombies when it was pretty much its own thing in its own regard. As for the campaign, Call of Duty Ghosts told a very good story that I really wish I did find out what happened after it, because we most likely won't see a Call of Duty Ghosts 2, so we most likely never will understand what happened. But the story and the missions in Call of Duty Ghosts were pretty fun. I mean, I had a lot of fun playing that, and I could replay that campaign over and over and over. Post-launch for Call of Duty Ghosts was pretty good too. With the DLC we saw some really cool things. Obviously it was a standard DLC kind of launch and everything, but we saw little cool stuff like the Michael Myers game mode with the DLC or stuff like that. Like that was something really cool. You can literally play as Michael Myers, the fan favorite kind of custom party game that people would do in Black Ops 2, like Swifter and stuff. You could actually now have a legitimate game mode to play it. Like, it was just really cool. They definitely tried to do a lot, and we saw some really cool maps with the DLC. I thought they definitely, in terms of the actual complaining regarding map size, I thought the DLC maps definitely fixed this, but it's just unfortunate because at the time of these DLC releases, the game was pretty much already dead in terms of actual Call of Duty previous stats from previous games. So basically my point of saying all this is that if you were to go back and play Call of Duty Ghosts right now, and you had the DLCs and everything, and you played campaign, you think it's a pretty solid game, and you definitely think that it's much better than some of these more previous games that we have gotten. Overall, I just feel like the bad blood that came along with Call of Duty Ghosts was just due mainly to its time release, and mainly to the fact that the game was completely ahead of its time and what it was being compared to. Just because something is ahead of its time doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing, at least in terms of actual PR and what people think about it. They could think it's too different or whatever. But I feel that Call of Duty Ghosts did receive too much hate, and if we look back on Call of Duty Ghosts, we should honestly give our apology to it. Quite frankly, pretty much now in the community, a lot of people are begging for a Call of Duty Ghosts style game to come back because Call of Duty Ghosts was essentially, I guess you can call it, the last modern Call of Duty we can have, I guess. I mean, it was kind of, you know, obviously futuristic to its a little own degree. I mean, it was just a little bit, nothing crazy. It was still mainly based on modern military equipment. But regardless, it was kind of like that perfect game. That's kind of like the setting I wanted for Black Ops 4. I mean, obviously I wanted a modern setting, but I feel like a Call of Duty Ghost setting would work very well for the Black Ops series. But regardless, guys, I can't really change anything, and this probably won't do a thing, but I just think if you're watching this video and you hate Call of Duty Ghosts, you should go and give it a try, because yes, it's going to be hard to get in games, but you will still be able to find some, and I feel like you will have a good time. Anyways, guys, with that being said, I really hope you enjoyed the video. I do hope you guys liked this video and share it with your friends. Get the word about Call of Duty Ghosts out there. But regardless, guys, I hope you all have a good day, and peace.